All right, we're going to introduce another new concept, and this is going to make it a lot easier for us to do a lot more cool stuff. We're going to introduce an idea called variables. So we're going to create a variable, and a variable is something we can use to store data in our program. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a variable by using the keyword let. And then I'm going to type a name of a variable. So the name could be anything. It doesn't matter. I could call it Bob if I want to. And I'm going to say this. So now, when we look at this expression, let Bob equal sign 0, semicolon. Let's parse this out. What this really is saying, the let keyword, let's go, is create a variable. So when I write let Bob, what I'm really saying is I'm going to create a variable named Bob. So far, so good. When I say Bob equal sign 0, I'm saying Bob gets 0. All right. So now I've created a space in memory and I put a label on it, Bob. And I put a 0 in that space in the memory. So far, so good. Now I know you're like, but why are we doing this, Mr. Dickey? Well, we'll show you here in a second. Now, we learned about console log in our last video. Console log can also print the value of a variable. So if I come down here and say the mouse was pressed, and instead I just change this to Bob, no quotes, all right? With no quotes, it's saying, look for the variable named Bob. And now when I run it, if I click over, just mouse click, we can see now we're printing the value 0 in our console log. Not so bad, right? So if we come back here and we say make Bob 10, so let Bob, so Bob gets 10, and I run this. Now when I click, I print the value 10. All right, now I'm gonna go ahead and set that back to 0 for a second. And then inside of mouse pressed, I'm gonna add a new line. And this line is why I don't say Bob equals. So if I do Bob equal sign, Bob plus 2, now, if this was a math class and you saw an expression that was said x equals x plus 2, you with me? X equals x plus 2. You would then take x away from both sides and then you would have 0 equals 2. That can't work, can it? So when I write line 16 here, I am not writing a mathematical expression. What I'm saying is Bob gets what's ever on the right-hand side of the equal sign, all right? And that's going to be whatever the current value of Bob is plus 2. So what's 0 plus 2? 2, look at that. You didn't even need a calculator, did you? So now the value of Bob is 2. So far, so good. So when I run this, first line of the code executes. So Bob gets 0. Then we create our canvas, we set our background, and now we're waiting for a mouse press. So when I press the mouse, Bob has a value of 0 right now. And as soon as I click, you can see I printed that value of 0. But then I went to line 16 and it says now Bob gets Bob plus 2. So Bob was 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. So now Bob is holding a value of 2. So when I click the mouse again, I'm going to console log again. And now I'll print 2 because Bob now has a value of 2. So I say look in the memory space named Bob, look inside there, I see 2. All right, so I'm going to print 2. Now I go to the next line and I say, okay, look in that memory space named Bob, which is, we got a 2 there. So 2 plus 2 is 4. So now I store 4 in that memory space labeled Bob. So now when I click again, it's 4. And if I keep clicking, every time I click, it's going to go up by 2. All right. Now what can I do with this? So let's say I had an ellipse and I drew it at 100, 200, and I made it 80 by 80. And I gave it a fill. I'm gonna give it a fill of Bob. All right. So now I'm also gonna make it so that it increases faster. I'm gonna make it increase by 10. You with me? So now when I run this, and I click the mouse once, so again, when I ran it, let Bob creates a variable. Bob gets 0, so I've got a variable named Bob, and I've dropped a 0 in it. So picture I've got a cup, and I've written the word Bob on the side of it, and I drop a 0 inside that cup. I create my canvas, I set my background, and then I wait. When the mouse is pressed, we call the mouse press function. We set the fill to Bob, and again, I look in the cup and I say, oh, in the cup is a 0. So now the fill is 0, and I draw an ellipse with a fill of 0, which is black. So far, so good. And then I print, console log says, all right, look in the cup labeled Bob, print the value you see. I see a 0. Great. Line 19 now says, look in the cup named Bob, so which is a 0. 0 plus 10 is 10. And now Bob gets 10. So now there's 10 inside the cup. So when I click again, you can't really tell, but the circle is a little lighter. So you can see our value is 10, so the fill is 10, and so on. So I'm going to keep clicking, and you'll see as I click, the value of Bob is increasing, which means our fill of our circle is getting lighter and lighter until we get to above 255, and 255 is as bright as it can be. And when P5JS sees a fill greater than 255, it just says make it 255, which is white. All right? Not so bad. So if I hit stop and I make this a bigger number, let's make it 30 and then run it, you'll see as I click, every time I click, it gets brighter faster. It doesn't take as many clicks to make it bright. I could go the opposite way also. So if instead of saying Bob gets 0, I said Bob gets 255, and then rather than adding, I subtract 30. Now when I run it, the first circle I draw, again, look in the cup, I see a 255 in the cup. Print the 255, because that's what line 18 tells me to do. Now take 30 away from 255, so it'll be 225. So the next time I click the mouse, when I look in the cup, Bob has a value of 255. I'm sorry, 225. And then as I click it, it gets darker and darker. So I can add, I can subtract, it doesn't really matter. Does that make sense? Now, using the word Bob to represent the shade of my ellipse is not a good plan, right? Because I don't know what that means. So if instead I come up here and say, I'm going to give it a name that is meaningful to me. So if I want the amount of gray as is what this is going to control, then I'm not going to call it Bob. I could, but I'm not going to, because I want to make sure it makes sense to me. So I'm going to call this gray. And then everywhere that Bob appears down here, I'm going to turn it to gray, so that when I read my code later, it makes sense to me. All right, so now when I run it, now when I click, it works exactly the same, only now when I read my code, it makes more sense. So I was saying create a variable that will control the amount of gray, and I called it gray, and then I set its value to 255. All right, so let's create another new variable. I'm going to use the let keyword, and I'm going to create a variable for the x position of our ball. I'm just going to call it x, and I'm going to set it equal to 100. Not so bad. So I say x gets 100. All right, now down here, this is the x of my ball, right? So if I change this to x, and now when I run it and I click, I get a ball, and it drew it. Where did it draw it? It drew it at x comma 200. Well, again, when we got to this, it looked in the cup and said, oh, on the cup labeled x, there's a 100, so I'm going to use 100. And then when I click again, it just changes shade. I don't have anything that's changing the value of x, do I? So just like I did for gray, I could do for x. So I'm going to copy these two lines, and I'm going to change this to x. And so now when I run it, oh, I'm printing two numbers there, right? Which one's which? Well, we can see what happened on the screen, but let's go back to look at our numbers for a second. I've got two numbers that I'm printing, but it's hard for me to tell which is which. So I'm going to show you another cool thing we can do with the console log line. So I'm going to go to the gray line, and I'm going to put a quotation. I'm going to say gray equals, so far so good, and I'm going to put a plus. So what this will do is it'll print this text followed by this variable number. Let's run that and see what it looks like. So, hey, there we go. In our console log, it is much more instructive. So I'm going to do the same thing for x. Now, one thing I want to draw your attention to real quick as I click this You'll notice I've got this nice spacing over here for the gray, but I don't have that spacing for the X. Why not? Well, it's going to smoosh these together unless I put a space in my console log line. So if I do that, now when I run it, all right, so I'm going to turn our minus back to a plus for a second for the X, and now when I click, we can see the ball is being drawn to the right. So let's stop and parse this out again. So I click start. Now, what we've done is we've created a variable called gray, and we've given it a value of 255. So line 1 says create gray, gray gets 255. Line 2 says create X, X gets 100. Then we go to our setup. In our setup, we say create canvas 400, 400. So we're going to create a canvas, you know that. And we're going to set the background to 220. Then we're going to wait. So now when I click the mouse one time, I first run line 14. So I set the fill to gray, and I look in the gray cup and it says 255. So the fill is now 255. I now go to draw an ellipse, and I got to look in the X cup, and X has a value of 100. So I draw it at 100, 200. And then I go to line 17 and I print the value of gray with this line. Then I say gray gets gray minus 30. So I look in the gray cup, 255. I take 255, take 30 away. So now it's 225. And I store that in gray because gray gets gray minus 30. Then I print the value of X. And then X gets X plus 30. So X, I look in the cup, 100, 100 plus 30 is 130, so X gets 130. So now the next time I click, gray still has that value of 255, so it prints it a lighter ellipse, because now the fill is 225 instead of 255. I'm sorry, a darker ellipse. And then I look in the X cup, X now has a value of 130, so you can see that's why I drew it at a new location. So far, so good. All right, I'm going to change the, and then as I keep clicking, I keep decreasing the value of gray, which makes it darker, and increasing the value of X, which draws it further and further to the right. All right? Not so bad. All right, now we're going to do one other thing, which is I am going to make this smaller. So I'm going to add just 5. And then I'm going to click, and you can see it's moving not quite as far every time I click. And then I'm going to add another new line to my mouse pressed function. I'm going to write background. Now the name background is deceiving. It seems to imply that it sets the background color of your canvas. And it can, depending on how we use it. So what background actually does is background fills the entire canvas with the color in the parentheses. So in this case, 220. So now, when I run this, I create my variable named gray. Gray gets 255. Create my variable named X. X gets 100. I create the canvas, and I create the background. Now when I click the mouse, I fill the entire screen with 220, and I create a fill of 255, and I draw an ellipse at 100, 200, and then I click the mouse again, and you'll notice I don't see that first ellipse anymore, do I? That's because when I click the mouse, I fill the entire screen with 220, which means it kind of erases everything that was there before, and it draws the new thing. And if I keep clicking, it looks now like I've got a ball moving to the right. And really what's happening is I'm just redrawing it to the right every time I click the mouse. Not so bad, right? All right, now what I want you to do a little bit, so I want you to play with this idea a little bit, all right? I want you to take what I've just done, create a variable, make the ball move to the right, or make the ball move to the left, make the ball move up, or make the ball move down. I want you to do all of those things playing with this, and then come back and we'll explore a little bit more together. But first you're going to, when you click the mouse, make it move up or down, left or right, play a little bit and see what you can do with moving shapes around on your screen using this idea.